Okay, I wanted to share with you something about the nature of biblical prophecy, because while the book of Revelation is not technically just a prophetic book, it has a lot of the earmarks of prophecy. And what I'm going to tell you about biblical prophecy applies to the book of Revelation. As I was just chatting with some of the people who got here early, there's not many subjects in biblical studies that has been as confused and misused as the idea of prophecy. If you listen, as I used to listen when it was on radio, I hardly ever watch other preachers on television, but I'm sure if I did, it would be the same subject. It's one of those subjects that allows a person who is narcissistic or self-important to act as if they know something that ordinary mortals do not know. And as a result, they have put into the public domain completely misleading ideas about prophecy. I really found that out when I taught the men's next level course, Bible study, early in the morning on Thursdays. I fully believe that's what the straw that broke the camel's back caused me to have a heart attack on the night of January 1st, 2013, not 1913. What did you say?
Nothing.
Okay. So these are just some, they're not random notes, but some notes I sat down this afternoon and wrote down that based on my experience in teaching the prophetic books. First of all, they always spoke primarily to their contemporaries. Now, that means the message they had was for the people that were alive when they lived. Even the dictionary will mislead you here, because if you look up the word prophecy or the verb to prophesy, they'll say to foretell the future. And that is not what it means in the Bible. The word prophecy and prophets never anywhere in the whole Bible means to foretell the future. Now, that's a pretty generalized statement, but I can back it up. I have checked every one of them. And so just bear in mind that the word prophet, prophesy, and prophecy, all those cognate words, described a message that was for the people that were the contemporaries of the prophet. When we studied on how to read the Bible for all it's worth, we called the prophets the people who judged Israel as to whether or not they had kept the covenant. And that, most of the Old Testament prophets, that's true. They charged Israel with being unfaithful to the covenant, and that they pictured then that God would punish them for that. And this went on for a couple of 100 years, and then the tone of prophecy changed. it became not that God will punish you if you don't change, but it became it's too late to change. God is going to destroy the kingdom. And he did. And that's the kind of thing that prophecy is. They spoke as God directed them to. Their message was not their own. They were not innovators. They were not primarily creators of their message, although whoever wrote Isaiah, all of it, Isaiah and perhaps others, were great poets. And Jeremiah was a pretty fair country poet himself. And Ezekiel was a very imaginative writer. His images are still with us. The valley of dry bones, the chariots of fire, things like that have become part of the believer's heritage. But their message was from God. They sometimes called their message a burden. They would say, this is the burden that God gave me. And that indicates that they felt a deep obligation, but also a deep responsibility. It was something heavy to carry, heavy to do. They recognized that they were being the mouthpieces of God, and they took that very seriously. And it's amazing how many times you will see that this is the burden that God sent me concerning, and it will be some group of people, or the children of Israel. Prophecy involves some kind of a change in their state of consciousness. By that I mean when they were in the prophetic mode, the way they thought and taught was changed. In fact, it was usually something that could be observed. You remember the occasion where King Saul behaved in a certain way, and the people chided him and said, has Saul joined the company of the prophets? It probably has something to do in what we would call a trance-like stage. But it was something that people could observe. And one of the things that you may have missed in Old Testament history is that there were, you didn't miss the idea that there were false prophets, but that there were schools of prophets where people were trained to be prophets or to act in this way. Now, because the people knew what it was going on, nobody describes in detail what that manifestation was, except that it was something you could observe from the outside. Now we'll learn that about John in the book of Revelation. Their sense of the relative time was completely suspended. Now, this is a hard concept to get. I'll try my best. We have a sense, if you've studied history, if you've lived as long as I have and seen this much, you have this sense that event A occurred before event B you know, and on up till the present time. But the prophets in that altered state of consciousness lost that ability. And so you will have an event described that may be going to happen tomorrow, and then the next thing that is talked about is going to be at the last days. And there's no way to distinguish between that except by careful study. And I mean very careful study. So you will find that this is important to the study of the book of Revelation, because as we get into it, we'll see how that John described things that occurred as he was writing, and then he will describe things that will happen at the end of time. As Randy made a really good study of that 2 or 3 weeks ago, when he talked about a new heaven and a new earth, which is an idea that this is new to many believers. That difference simply did not exist. Even events, for instance, Isaiah talks about a new heaven and a new earth. In fact, the first mention of it is in Isaiah 65 and 66. And that is no different than when he told King Hezekiah that he had to do X, Y, or Z. There's no distinction in time. And that confuses us, because if there's one thing that modern Americans are aware of, it's time. I'm amused by the way they're advertising automobile insurance right now. And one of the ads says, well, you don't have to take 15 minutes to save time. We can do it in 7.5. And they're talking to the American sense of quicker is better idea. Well, you wouldn't get that from the prophets. They didn't have that. And the last thing I want to share with you is they spoke about things that they themselves did not understand. You remember that Peter says that the prophets spoke things that they didn't understand, and Jesus himself said the same thing. He said that people, that he told his apostles in more than one occasion, that you will be seeing things that other people really wanted to see and didn't. Now, see, out of these truths, is where people have twisted it in such a way that they have assumed it makes me important because I know something, because I understand the prophets and you don't. That's the way in which it's done. Now, it's not done that blatantly, but if you've ever listened to many preachers preach on prophecy, you will find that kind of an attitude is there. Now, that's all that I wanted to do as an introduction. But do you have any questions about that? Observations? Anybody? You look like you would like to.
I do, but I don't know how to say it. You that makes us understand the importance of the messages from God, not from his prophet. It's not his, you didn't even understand it.
Yes. See, prophecy always exalted God, not the prophet. I think that I should have added that to my note. But that's better late than never.
That's what I was trying to say. I don't know how to say it.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I was going to say that when you look at the prophecies of Jesus, a lot of people don't know this or understand this, but a lot of what was written, that they use a text from the Old Testament that tells about things that he was going to do or things. Some of the information in that text doesn't match up. But that's the interesting thing about prophecy, is that it doesn't have to necessarily match on everything. It's like God's intention is to reveal his Son. And he reveals his Son in various ways. But the New Testament writers would see little elements of, well, this is revealing the Son. And they would go with that.
Yeah, it is, as in all biblical studies, it's more complicated than people sometimes want to make it. Now, that does not mean that you have to have a PhD to understand the Bible. We discussed that more than once in our How to Read the Bible course. And it doesn't mean that you have to be exactly correct in everything, because being human beings, we just not ever going to be exactly correct in everything. That's one of the great responsibilities that I feel as a teacher. I know that some of the things I teach are not correct. Now, if I knew which ones they were, I would correct them. But as I say, being human, I dare not assume that I'm completely correct. I'm always in the process. And this is one reason I like to teach. Because if you discover something, you will certainly let me know. No. And that's what you should do. And I appreciate that. Any other general?
Just thought about the altered state of consciousness. That's an indicator, people look at the means. You talk about false prophets. And so somebody could look at that behavior as the prophet, but because they don't exalt God, they're false.
Yes.
But people look at the means. In other words, a person's in an altered state of consciousness, therefore he must be a prophet.
Yes, and it's something you could fake.
Yeah.
Which I think is implied in several places in the Old Testament. That one of my favorite, and it's not exactly prophecy, but it's when Saul goes to the so-called witch of Endor, and he wants, actually she was what we would call today a spirit medium. And if you read it carefully, it's very humorous, because Saul wants to call back the spirit of Samuel, and they are both terribly scared when she succeeds. Only it's not her succeeding. God wanted Samuel to take a message to Saul, but if you go back and read it carefully, you'll see that they were both scared out of their wits when Samuel did appear. And one of the things that connects in this is the appearance of Moses and Elijah on the Mount of Transfiguration. notice that they just suddenly appeared, and Peter and John recognized them, though they had never seen them before. And when I try to when I teach this, I point out what happens in our dreams. We have somebody appear. We may see them, in the face and recognize them that way, but we just know who they are. Have you ever had that experience in a dream? I'm constantly dreaming about my father, and I have never seen him. He's just a person I know is there, and I know who he is, and that's part of that kind of what we would have to call in the subconscious or the unconscious mind type of thing. Now this is important, this change of state, because John is going to tell us that he was in an altered state of consciousness. He said, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I saw. Welcome. You're still welcome. We actually haven't started studying Revelation yet. You missed a little introduction to prophecy, but that's okay. By the way, he will put these lessons on YouTube, and so if you want to pick it up, you can do so. You'll have to ask him about how to do that. That's beyond me.